I can tell you from my experience and what I've heard from others is that really extreme and beautiful things unfold in these spaces. And my uncle even told me when he was on a family constellation that suddenly he would see images of the Holocaust coming in. And while he was telling me this, many years later, it was still so real to him that, tears started rolling down his cheeks. And he didn't know that guy. He didn't know anything about the history. He just suddenly saw these images, and it was true. His father, or whatever, was in the Holocaust, and it's very profound. Honestly, it's one of the most magical things I've experienced in my life so far. He dropped some very interesting insights that were equally applicable to me, which was, you took all the responsibility for your parents, for I think even his grandfather. And in the family constellation system, that's not how it works. We can't help our parents. We are not responsible for our parents. It goes from up to down, right? So we are responsible for our own family, or when we have children, our children, or whatever it may be, but we are not responsible for our parents. And we can totally love our parents, but in this relationship to our parents, love is acceptance. And that really hit home because I've always had such a helper syndrome, like really, trying to save the world. When we take responsibility of our parents, we of course also do that in other relationships. And it became like so warmly and lovingly embraced throughout. It was really, really amazing. Like it was almost like a psychedelic experience, to be honest. All right, ladies and gents, I just came back from a family constellation here in Tulum, Mexico, and it was a surprisingly profound experience. And I would love to talk about some of the key takeaways and some of the things also I'd like to remember about this experience. So you are in for a ride. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you don't know what family constellation is, it's basically a form of therapy that works on the subconscious and on an energetic level, or how I like to call it, complete freaking magic. I don't know what's going on because what's basically happening is you go to a space, usually it's in a bigger room, and usually 4 to 8 people. Sometimes there are many more. I've heard of family constellations of 20, 30 people, but I haven't been to those. Usually the ones I've attended have been around 8 people, maybe 10. Then there's one facilitator. And what the facilitator does is basically it can be very different depending on the facilitator. So I can only share what my experience has been. I don't know what the original exact doctrines are. I'm sure there are different schools and teachings, but basically what happens is that you get to choose who plays roles. So for example, you say, hey, this person is gonna be my mom, this person is gonna be my dad, and this person is gonna be me. So then these people, the other people that you are there in a group with, are that role. And usually they don't know anything about you, about your mom, or about your dad. It can also be other people in your family that are gonna be put on stage, you could say. But this is, for example, what we did today. And what happens then is that you sit back and just watch. And I was thinking, what could possibly happen, right? They don't know really something about me or my mom or my dad. So what could possibly happen? But that is the magic of a family constellation. And again, I have no clue how this works. Maybe there's research on it, maybe there isn't. But many people have experienced this. And what they report is basically when you stay present and open, there's some sort of energy coming in. It feels like a flow and it guides your body. and it can have there's a broad spectrum. You can sometimes you may not feel a lot or anything. Other times, on the other side of the spectrum, you may be in complete trance, and it almost feels like your body's being moved in the space by a ghost or a higher force. It maybe feels like you're almost impersonated by something else. There may be a lot of emotions coming up. So it's mostly about what you feel emotionally and what intuitively you are guided to move, how you are guided to move. And that is basically what happens in this family constellation or systems work, is that the energetic blockages in your family system, so on an energetic level and on a subconscious level, the dynamics in our family get organized again. Stuck energy gets unstuck and things get put into order again, and therefore give you the ability to heal. So that sounds kind of, can sound pretty out there for if you haven't experienced this. And I think, as with everything, they're very good facilitators and not so good facilitators. And what the facilitator will basically do, and this can depend, it can either be in complete silence, or the facilitator can basically facilitate this by holding the space, speaking short, certain sentences to trigger something up, or ask questions, or it's usually not so much about thinking and talking or anything like that. It's really mostly, again, emotional, energetic, with what's happening with movement. And it's really, you would think that only random things would come up, right? But I can tell you from my experience and what I've heard from others is that really extreme and beautiful things unfold in these spaces. And my uncle even told me when he was on a family constellation that he was put for someone else, like his father or whatever, and then suddenly he would see images of the Holocaust coming. And then while he was telling me this, many years later, it was still so real to him that, tears started rolling down his cheeks. And he didn't know that guy. He didn't know anything about the history. He just suddenly saw these images, and it was true. His father or whatever was in the Holocaust, and it's very profound, honestly. It's one of the most magical things I've experienced in my life so far. I've done two. This was my second family constellation. First one I did in Berlin, Germany. This one here in Tulum, Mexico. My aunt also did one for me where I wasn't present, in Uruguay, South America. And that was spot on. She didn't know anything about my dad, but she basically found out in that family constellation when she talked to the people that that someone in my family died in a sandstorm. And when I asked my dad about it, I didn't know about it either. He said, yes, actually my grandfather died in a sandstorm in the Sahara, where my dad is from Mauritania. And I was like, what? And he had no clue because he never told my aunt. So it was, yeah, anyway. Enough of context on family constellation. What happened today? Well, basically, I arrived, a beautiful setting here, we were in the coffee shop, Tulum, Mexico, called Raw Love. Very beautiful place on the main street. And I arrived there, and it was very nice because I just recently arrived here, and I was kind of looking, where may I meet some nice, like-minded people, and boop, suddenly they were there. Very beautiful beings. And yeah, we went up into the yoga space, and he gave an intro. It was led by Frank, I think Frank Günther. I can put a link into the description to his family constellations. I'll put also a link into the description to the family constellation I did in Berlin. Another one, a really good one in Cologne, Germany as well. And we started with someone else started, and I didn't honestly feel so much when I think he put one of the girls as his mom, another guy as his dad, and he put me as himself. So he sat back, I basically was him, and not a lot, I didn't feel a lot. The girls felt much more happened with them. And I haven't talked to the guy, but it seemed like something processed for him as well. And afterward, when they shared, there was some very interesting insights. And the facilitator, I won't say that nothing happened. I definitely had, similar to the first family constellation where I kept like walking backwards in small circles. Like, it was kind of, when I just stand there presently, I feel, he instructed us, feel your feet, stay present, open. It's like very interesting to drop out of the mind in these spaces. It's almost easier. It's very intentional, or not intentional. It's like with intention you can slip into the state of just letting things unfold. And when we had this sharing after his round, quote unquote, he dropped some very interesting insights that were equally applicable to me, which was, hey, in the family constellation work, you took all the responsibility for your parents, for I think even his grandfather. And in the family constellation system, that's not how it works. We can't help our parents. We are not responsible for our parents. It goes from up to down, right? So we are responsible for our own family, or when we have children, our children, or whatever it may be, but we are not responsible for our parents. And we can totally love our parents, but in this relationship to our parents, love is acceptance. And that really hit home because I've always had such a helper syndrome, like really, trying to save the world, trying to help my dad, and even to a point where it was almost aggressive, right? Like, notice that there's almost an anger part of me that's like pressuring, and then um, it's not a loving necessarily. It's not. I mean, I think it comes from an intention of love, helping people, but how I do it is then maybe with impatience at some point, and at that point it's not loving anymore. And it's so true what he said, because first of all, we are not responsible for our parents, and if we can accept them as they are, not only can we leave them to their own journeys, and it is really what they and maybe their soul needs to experience right now, but also when we accept them, when we ask ourselves, how do I feel when I take so much responsibility on? How does it make me feel? And how do we feel when we give it back and accept them as they are? What I answered was, hey, I feel burdened by it. And when I accept it, there's initially a sadness and a pain, but then it's actually very freeing and liberating. That's my alarm. So let's continue with the family constellation. He just, after the first guy we completed his round, we shared some insights. And later, I had also asked him about it, and he mentioned how when we take responsibility of our parents, we of course also do that in other relationships. And when I got set up, I told him a little bit of context about like an issue, a recurring pattern or pain that I've been experiencing. So we had some initial setup. He asked me a couple of questions about my family. So this time in this family constellation, it was actually a little bit more info I had shared with him. He said that it can be done in complete silence, but sometimes it can be helpful to say it to pull in the energy or really become present with it. So then we started, and I was honestly surprised how accurate it was. I could almost feel like how the people were moving in the room and behaving was spot on. I could see my dad in her. Actually, I put my dad's role onto one of the women that were present, and my mom as well. And it was literally like, wow, they didn't know these people, but the way what they said and what they shared was very accurate. And at some point, he said that, hey, this is why you have dysfunctional relationships. You never were taught and learned it at home and with your parents, and you have adopted these belief systems and emotional structures and whatnot. And that made me start laughing. And then he said, hey, what's below that laughter? And then after some time, I suddenly started crying out of sadness, and I really felt it. And then at that point, he said, hey, don't get lost in the emotion, breathe. And I think that made me suppress the emotion, and that made me a little bit angry, which is interesting because in that moment, I guess I wasn't trusting my intuition or masculine, which was the whole learning, right? I couldn't trust my dad, so I couldn't trust my own masculinity, the father within. And Now I still feel some of it, but it was a beautiful reconciliation of my family, reintegrating codependency, which was a central theme. But to learn to love myself, so this was from my mom's side, not getting it from her, and this was a dysfunction in my romantic relationships, trying to get it from other women and creating codependency, but loving myself. And then the other big part is the self-trust, which is I didn't trust myself because I couldn't trust my dad. So this is the father's side. Mother's side, father's side. Feminine energy, masculine energy. Codependency, maybe expressed in neediness in relationships and fear. And on the father's side, the lack of trust is expressed in insecurity, maybe confusion. And it became like so warmly and lovingly embraced throughout. It was really, really amazing. Like it was almost like a psychedelic experience, to be honest. If family constellations reveal this much truth, then and I can step into this intuitive guidedness. Let's start to practice this in everyday life, especially in the situations where I feel most usually in my head, controlling, planning, expecting, and really step into it and go with it and see what happens. What he mentioned, and this was very interesting, is that sometimes it's good to not talk about experiences. And I've really been wondering about it because I didn't know why. And he said today, the facilitator, Frank, that there's basically energy moving in us, right? As emotion or insight or whatever it may be. And when we talk, we basically take this, our energy and attention away from it and basically put it into the mind. And then maybe even, when we say, even distribute it out. And that can diminish the experience. And I was always wondering why that is, but that makes so much sense. So a lot of times it's better to stay with them and let the process complete itself. Altogether, it really was a beautiful experience. And authenticity authenticity is full trust and immediacy. It's spontaneous flow where there's no second thought and it is not even necessarily thought through. It's okay, that's here. All right, that's like it's a simple, almost obvious thing. It can be subtle, but it is okay. Yeah, right. Okay. Oh, I feel this. All right. Okay. Now I say this. Okay. And it doesn't need to go through a process of the mind, which is really interesting. And this is very a concept like authenticity or immediacy or spontaneity or honesty or don't get stuck in the mind. All these things we may have heard many times, but it's not but. And it is very interesting because as we go through life, these concepts may gain in more nuance. There can be new facets revealed of these things, and they just get a deeper and richer meaning as we go through life. And almost, unlock these new ways of looking at them and implications and whatnot. So it's it was a very enriching day today because there were so many things that I didn't know that popped up and that really were great puzzle pieces. And the funny thing is that it was more or less an intuitive, not intuitive, it was the move to go there. I almost didn't, but the move to go there, there was a pull, there was a calling. So I encourage you that when you feel these slight nudges, the more quiet we can be in the mind, as Michael Singer from the Surrender Experiment says, the more quiet we can be in the mind, the more we can simply surrender into the next step, the easier and more synchronistic life becomes. So it's not about endlessly planning, controlling, and enforcing our will onto life. Because, and this is a quote from Michael Singer, life had more to give than I could ever take from it.